Hello and welcome to Measured Thoughts. I'm Dave Reepstein, and I'm joined today by my guest, Ted Woerhle, who is the Senior Vice President of Marketing and Brand Management at Newell Rubbermaid. Ted, glad to have you here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Let's begin today by getting a little bit of background of who you are. You know, where have you been and how did you get to your current position?
Okay. Well, I've been with Newell Rubbermaid for a little bit over a year, but I actually started my career with Procter & Gamble about 25 years ago. So I started as an engineer. I worked in the manufacturing, so I did projects and supervision in the manufacturing facilities, and around 1989, I transferred into marketing, and I followed a traditional marketing and general management career path.
Which brands were you working on at P&G?
Well, I grew up mostly in food and beverage division, a lot of which is gone now.
Right.
But that would be Jif Peanut Butter, Folgers Coffee, the acquisition of Millstone Coffee. Those were the main brands I worked.
Okay, and which countries?
All United States.
All the United States, yeah. Okay.
When I moved to general management, I was in new product development, which was a global role. And I also ran a small startup called Tremor. It's an in-house agency focused on word-of-mouth marketing. Both had some spans outside the U.S., but were based in the U.S.
Yeah, I might note that Tremor is sort of renowned as the best in class of sort of social marketing and
it's a very successful
marketing
business model, and it was used by Procter & Gamble brands, but almost 80% of revenue came from outside of Procter & Gamble.
Yeah, and after doing Tremor, then what did you do at P&G?
I spent the last 3 years there as Vice President of Marketing for North America, and that was mostly working on shared services and media buying, and the other half of my job was capability building. It was training and development, as well as staffing and succession planning for the North American organization.
Interesting. So a very rich background in marketing and across a variety of dimensions, and then you moved over to Newell Rubbermaid.
Yes.
So let's go back and talk a little bit about your experiences at Tremor.
Yeah.
And what it is that you might have learned at Tremor that you've been able to import into Newell Rubbermaid.
Right. Well, there's kind of two fundamentals in the Tremor marketing model, which is about viral or social network marketing. One is that you have to find the right people that at Tremor we called connectors, people that being in the center of a social network and sharing knowledge and ideas and influencing others is kind of the core part of their identity. So if you can isolate them, which Tremor was able to do through a survey and build a relationship with them, that's a really rich base to tap into. But that's just half the equation. The other half of the equation, which we're really exploiting more at Newell Rubbermaid right now, is you have to give them something to talk about, something that's chat-worthy. So one of the secrets to word-of-mouth marketing is providing your consumers with something to have a dialogue or to talk about that's chat-worthy. So when you talk to a typical brand manager in any business, they'll want people to talk about the benefits of their brand. Cleans your hair, makes you smell good, and that's not chat-worthy. What's chat-worthy is a story behind the story behind the story about perhaps how the product came to market, who invented it, who designed it. Maybe that you allow the person to sneak peek or actually input onto the design of the product 6 months ahead of time, so when it launches, they're excited to talk about it. So this notion of creating something chat-worthy, we've tried to bring to our brands at Newell Rubbermaid right now, because we don't really have a database, if you will, of connectors.
Are you measuring at all the word-of-mouth communication that's happening right now?
No, we're not, but that's also on our list of things to do. There are services you can buy, and I have a number of friends in the industry that have offered those services, and we haven't been quite ready to take advantage of that. But that's one great way of understanding if our messages are getting out there and if consumers are helping to spread messages in a positive way or even in a negative way. We need to know that too.
Right. One could be monitoring blogs.
Yes.
Or looking at various, if you have a website where people can be communicating with you, are you capturing that right now?
Right now, it's only brand by brand, and it's only our own site and our own correspondence. So there are companies out there that can provide the service you're talking about, talk about positive and negative mentions, help you understand the dialogue. We haven't tapped into that. That's on our list of things to do.
Okay. So I suspect everybody's very familiar with Rubbermaid, but Newell Rubbermaid. Tell me about Newell Rubbermaid. Who are they?
It's a good question. Most people think Rubbermaid is who I work for, including my mother. And so I have to explain. Newell Rubbermaid is a $6 billion company. It's a global company. About 75% of sales are in North America, however. And the brands you'd be familiar with would include, of course, Rubbermaid, but then we've got Levolor blinds. We make Sharpie markers and highlighters. We make Papermate pens, Dymo labelers, Teflon cookware, Lennox industrial tools, Graco strollers and baby seats, Goody hair products and styling aids, and a number of other brands.
Wow. So it's an amazing spectrum because you have industrial products, you've got pens, you've got, as you said, this whole spectrum of different products.
Yes.
And you sort of manage marketing for the whole spectrum.
Right.
So how do you go about defining what the goals and objectives are of marketing, given this breadth of products and categories that you run?
Right. Well, it's grounded in our company's goals, which our CEO calls it's growth, basically, but he calls it the growth trifecta. So our company is working to build a track record of building the top line, the bottom line, as well as gross margins year over year. And the growth in the gross margin area is what we take a significant portion of that and we reinvest it back into brand building to create this virtuous circle of brand building over time. So marketing's role is to support that. And so my job is to help the brands in setting their objectives and building their capability to achieve that mission.
And your CEO defines the role of marketing as that, building the brand?
It would be a little bit more narrow. I mean, yes, in the broadest sense, but it's really about demand creation. But to get demand creation, we had to start from really fundamentally understanding what position we wanted our brand to have, the consumer insights behind that, and the consumers we wanted to target, and then the specific activity that it would take to do that.
And your CEO comes with a marketing background as well?
Yes. Actually, our CEO's name is Mark Ketchum. He spent 33 years at Procter & Gamble, coincidentally, and he was my boss for a year and a half. So he has a rich background in brand building, and it's one of the advantages of joining Newell Rubbermaid in my position is knowing that I've got a very strong advocate for brand building as my CEO.
Let's talk about your CFO.
Yes.
So what's the perspective of the CFO at Newell Rubbermaid with respect to the role of marketing?
I think he's very much aligned with the notion of the fact that building brands, or what we actually, our CEO has coined the phrase brands that matter, it makes a difference financially, near term and long term. The company has a history with our strong portfolio of marketing that was more push oriented and more product oriented, less demand creation and less brand focused. And he's already seen in the 3 years that Mark's there some benefits to our business from it. So he's a strong supporter.
So he recognizes the value in creating sort of this, what you refer to it as demand creation. Demand creation. Mm-hmm. More focused on margins, more focused on bottom line than top line?
It's a pretty good balance between top and bottom line. The gross margins come along with the increase in the top line, and there's also, of course, within the company, plenty of efforts just to streamline costs. And the good news, though, is he's very supportive as those costs come in. They don't all flow to the bottom line. A lot flow into brand building.
And this notion of brand building is one that the CFO gets.
Yes.
And even though it's a long-term perspective rather than necessarily a short-term perspective.
Yes.
Do you measure what the impact is of your marketing efforts on this demand creation on the top line as well as on the bottom line?
Well, only in the broadest sense. What we have right now is our marketing budgets at Newell Rubbermaid are fairly modest by many standards, and so the efforts we have, the investment back into the demand creation is something that year upon year, this is 3 years now, we've seen the top line and bottom line grow. We don't have the capability right now to tie it directly to dollars spent equals X dollars return. There is a correlation, however, right now that's working pretty well.
So you've got various different divisions there at Newell Rubbermaid. How is the decision made about sort of allocation across the various different divisions?
Mm-hmm. Well, we look at during the strategy planning part of the budget process, who's coming forward with the biggest growth opportunities, the best and most robust choices. And that does influence where the overall allocation of funds go. So if you have a plan that shows you're going to stretch more and you're going to need some investment to stretch more in marketing and new products, you will likely be given a higher allocation of those resources. You come in with a very conservative plan, looks like you're kind of in a bunker mentality, you'll get less. So that helps. We try to place bets where people are willing to take a calculated risk and allocate the resources that way.
Each division has its own vice president of marketing.
Yes.
Do they have a standard approach that is used across the different divisions for trying to put together their marketing budget?
Not today. We're going to build that in next year, a standard operating calendar and a standard template, if you will, for building plans with best practices. But at this point, people are following pretty much the same rigor, but you wouldn't recognize the plans as being created in an identical fashion if you were to go in and look at it.
So each vice president of marketing puts together and makes their case for how much money they want to have in marketing.
Exactly. They know that the more they promise in terms of growth and the more their business is making progress towards gross margin expansion, they can make a case to get a bigger chunk of that to increase their budget for next year and to drive growth.
And within any one of those divisions, how do they go about making some decision about how much to spend on which of the particular marketing activities?
Well, what we're doing now gets into this notion of fewer, bigger, better. It's getting more people in the room and talking about where the big drivers are. Until a couple of years ago, I would have to say generally it was more of, I hate to say peanut butter approach, but we treated product lines similarly. And so you get a certain percentage of sales to drive your product line within a brand. And now we're trying to be a little bit better about saying, these one or two product lines or this new initiative is the key to driving the total brand in the coming year. So it will get a disproportionate amount of resources.
So I'm going to want to spend some time, now that we sort of understand what Newell Rubbermaid is and sort of what's expected of marketing, I do want to spend some time trying to look at the tools that you use for trying to assess whether or not marketing is accomplishing any of that.
Okay.
So let me get a sense of what are the measures that you do look at to try and ascertain whether or not marketing is accomplishing its goals?
Well, we look at basic measures of top-line growth for a brand as well as market share as an indicator of the brand's health. And then we do our best to look for a correlation between the activity, the marketing activity, and those results. Because we are not continuously advertising, continuously launching new products, it's somewhat more episodic, flighting, if you will. There is an opportunity to look at those trends in light of spending and after spending during a period to launch a product or a net campaign, and not. There's also sometimes we have the ability to do test versus control. So we'll do we'll leave out some markets from a spend level and see how we do versus those. And that's about as sophisticated as we can get right now at understanding the lift we get from spending behind marketing.
And when you talk about the lift, you're talking about the lift in sales?
Sales and market share, yes.
Do you capture any intermediary measures? Sort of like things like awareness,
yes, we do.
Distribution coverage.
Those studies right now we do on at least an annual basis. We try to do twice per year, but we look at household penetration and share of requirements, what we would call loyalty in our terms, to try to understand if over time that's growing. Awareness is a factor we look at, but so many of our brands have very high levels of awareness, at least in the United States. That's not as big a factor as purchase consideration and then actual household penetration.
Actually, you just raised an interesting question with your little dependent clause you threw in there of within the United States.
Right.
Are you also measuring these things outside of the United States and globally?
Yes, but not as much, and mostly only in Western Europe, where we've got a significant business there. We measure awareness initially, like we're just launching Sharpie in Western Europe, and so naturally we have to understand what's the awareness of Sharpie, how does it fall in terms of purchase consideration. But more than just awareness of the Sharpie name, we also do some research to see what they're associating with it, because as you might imagine, our Sharpie it's quite an important product here and quite a well-known brand, but over there it's just a pen. And they have to learn that it's permanent, it comes in a range of colors, so there's a lot more education. So the measures over there are different, and that early on part of the purchase funnel and consideration is where we focus a lot of our time.
So I want to think about short-term measures and then longer-term measures. Do you look at different things to capture the short-term, thinking about the early stage of the funnel and then later stages?
Well, Europe's the best example for that, or a new product launch. But early on, it is a lot to do with awareness, purchase consideration, and then trial. Does it even get in the household, and or on the job site for that matter? And then I guess longer term, because some of our products do have fairly long purchase cycle, it would be repeat purchase. It would be share of requirements. We don't have today long-term or even near-term robust measures of brand equity. That's something we aspire to have, that we're working on, but we don't have that right now.
Yeah, so you have a portfolio of really strong brands, but you're not actively out measuring what that brand equity is.
No, and that's not because we don't believe it or value in it. It's because at this stage of our brand's development and the focus on demand creation, the focus on pull versus push marketing, et cetera, we're working on a lot more blocking and tackling, just making sure we really understand what our brand should stand for versus competition, and winning with the consumers that we think are the best fit to connect with our brands.
So do you measure at all the value of a customer and the total customer equity? And by the way, I'll say most companies don't measure that.
We don't today. We understand it in the sense that we understand the importance of finding the right consumer, making the right high-quality connection with them at first so they have a very good experience with our product, and then measuring repeat purchase. But we haven't really put pen to paper to say the lifetime value of a loyal Sharpie user is X, or a loyal Graco stroller and car seat user is Y. We haven't done that level of work yet.
Right. So every company goes through this balance of sort of push and pull, and you've described Newell Rubbermaid as historically being very push-oriented. What are you doing to try and change that balance to bring it more, both push and pull?
Well, the transformation started about 3 years ago when our CEO came in and started this direction. And the effort initially is basically starting with educating the folks on the real value of the brands and the value of the brands that can come from creating consumer pull in conjunction with the push. When they work together, they're much stronger than either one by themselves. And that was started with a series of talks, basic workshops that were done. We have a program called Marketing Excellence Training for mostly junior and mid-level managers, and it's recently migrated to senior executive training, which we just held at Wharton just a couple of weeks ago, as a matter of fact. That was a starting point, just getting grounded in basic education.
So it's bringing the education, and then in terms of you've been sort of working on that push side. What's the next step? Sort of what's the framework look like for where you're going to go once you get past the education?
Well, what we've created is what we call a marketing blueprint. There's 9 elements, which I won't list, one of which is metrics, an important part of which is metrics. But there are the 9 key elements we've defined that would, if we satisfied them, if we met the assessment, the key elements assessment, would define a world-class, best-in-class marketing organization. So we did that about a year ago. We've asked each individual brand to assess themselves on the 9 metrics. It's a key elements assessment on a scale of 1 to 5, and it has everything to do with from brand positioning, consumer insights, innovation, down to metrics and other elements. And we are kind of on average about a 2.5 on the journey to 5 right now. But what's really important is it allowed each business unit, each brand to individually assess where they're at and see exactly what's needed to move up that next rung of the ladder towards best in class. So that's been a big driver.
So how are decisions made in the absence of that information today? You don't have all the consumer insights.
Right.
At least you don't have them from a marketing research standpoint, but there's a lot of experience.
Yes.
So how do you try and make some decisions about what activities to participate in, how much to be spending in the absence of any of that data?
Well, you're right. We have a rich experience and actually very rich understanding of the consumer from a standpoint where people spend a lot of time in the field, not doing what you would call classical market research, although we have a significant amount of that that's come along the last year or two as well. But what we do as part of separate workshops and planning stages is we get a multifunctional group of people in the room. We bring that expertise to the table, and we talk about what we think are the highest leverage points, both from a product innovation standpoint and how our pipeline should be filled with new product initiatives, as well as brand positioning and marketing communications. And so it's judgment, but it's well-informed judgment at this point, and much more disciplined than we might have done in the past.
So what I love about what you're describing is you bring people together and try to make explicit what their judgment is.
Yes.
And see if you can come to some convergence in judgment.
We'll try to restate it and then test it against experience in the room and then whatever market research we might have. And what it's allowing us to do is make progress on developing initiatives in terms of products as well as marketing initiatives we call fewer, bigger, better. Until you kind of do that disciplined process, you kind of have everybody raising their hand saying, I'd like a little piece of the marketing budget, I need to support my small part of the product line, and the resources get spread fairly thin. And so you have a presence, but it's a little bit diluted. What we've been able to do in the last couple of years is try to bring those people together, recognize what's truly important based on our research and our experience, and focus those resources. And that's what's been helping drive our growth.
So you said testing some of that judgment. Do you run any experiments or test markets to test various different programs?
We do. Most of them are actually done at the retail level. We do some test and control markets where we're actually looking at consumer behavior and media consumption, if you will, but that's not the biggest part. Mostly we'll get a new product and maybe a marketing program, and we'll go into a city or two and work in conjunction with our biggest retailers, and we'll do it ourselves and with them versus hiring a research firm to do it. But it will be a test versus control, and we'll look at what type of a lift we get with that activity.
Can you share a specific recent example?
Yes, we did some work with Rubbermaid has a garage organization program where it's called Fast Track. You hang a rail on the wall and clips and different devices that allows you to clean up your garage and get it neatly organized.
Now, can you come to my house?
Yeah, it's really a wonderful product. But we noticed it really wasn't moving very well, not meeting our expectations, and we expected, or we assumed that it was probably because people weren't aware of it, and they were also having trouble finding it in the store. So we worked with one of our key retailers to give it a more prominent location in the store and some in-store signage, and we also ran a television campaign, which is unusual. We don't run a lot of television, and we saw a significant lift in the markets where we did that, and we expanded it.
Great. Do you also learn from some experiments that fail?
Yes. Yeah. I'm trying to think. I guess I can't give you a specific example, but that experiment might have not have paid out, or it might have shown no difference. And of course, we wouldn't repeat it, or we'd try again. We would try an alternative. We'd learn from the experience, and we'd take another run at a different approach.
I wanted to highlight that to say there's learning that happens whether it's successful or not, and that's why it's really good to do some of those particular experiments.
One of the other things we do, even that it's not really purely an experimental approach, but we have a twice-a-year review of our new product launches, and it's a discipline that's most businesses have. But has made a big difference for us because we've looked at what we've achieved versus what our objectives were, and then we make course corrections, and we try to build that learning not only within the brand that presented it, but across the whole enterprise. When you've got such a diverse array of brands that we do, you might think there's not a lot of synergy perhaps in selling at the retail level, but there's tremendous amount of synergy in learning from a marketing standpoint or consumer insights and research standpoint.
Yeah, so I want to pursue that a little bit more and try and understand what's the process within the company that you share your information. So you were just talking about sharing across different divisions.
Right.
Is it possible that Graco could end up learning from Sharpie? And how does that happen?
Absolutely. Right now, it happens about twice. It happens in a person-to-person structure. We're working to build the capacity. It'll be launched shortly for online collaboration and posting of case studies. But until recently, and currently I should say, we do about twice per year, we do marketing summits, North America and in Europe. And we get together and we share case studies. And we talk about what works as well as what didn't work. And we do our best to celebrate the successes, and to the degree you can celebrate the failures and what we learn from them. So there's that learning which goes on. We also get learning by having people move. So if someone moves from the Graco division to the office products, they bring their learning with them. And so that helps. And we're now about to launch our intranet site that allows for some more collaboration and posting of case studies and learning so that it'll be easy for anyone to pull down anywhere in the world.
You're currently headquartered in Atlanta, right?
Yes.
But each of the divisions are located...
We have 3 big divisions. Well, office products is in Chicago area, and our cleaning, organization, decor, and tools business is primarily near Charlotte, North Carolina. And then our home and family group is primarily in Atlanta. And then we have another big headquarters that has all the businesses in Paris. Those are our 4 biggest offices.
So that's why it's necessary to sort of pull together these summits and work on the internet side.
You can't just have a town hall meeting and call everyone down to the auditorium in our company. It doesn't work that way.
Okay. And are there certain measures that you look at across the different business units?
Yes, but they're the common ones you would expect. Top line growth, market share. We do share internally bottom line as well as gross margin increases as well. Gross margin is a big focus for the company because it's an important driver of our bottom line and reinvestment in marketing. And we've achieved that through cost savings, of course, top line growth, but also by helping to sweeten the mix of products that we sell, helping to use marketing communications and other elements to trade consumers up from base level, entry level products to more sophisticated or preferred products that everyone gets a little bit of a win out of, the consumer, the retailer, and us.
And what gets reported up to the C-suite? Because not all the detail, we tried this experiment with garage organizers.
Actually, you'd be surprised. Most of that is actually communicated. We have, because our company, $6 billion is a large company in some areas, it's kind of small in others, but it's small enough where we have as twice-a-year reviews of the successes of our innovations with the CEO and his executive leadership team. As part of our regular business review process, people come in and highlight what worked and what didn't work on a marketing front, as well as on a new product innovation front. The other thing is because we're building this discipline, we start every one of these business reviews with a kind of touching base on, or a touch point on what is our brand positioning, who's our target consumer, what are we trying to accomplish. And that frames the rest of the discussion. We keep trying to go back to that touch point to make sure we build that discipline in.
If I'm trying to think about marketing and how it relates with the C-suite. Right now, the marketing budget is relatively small.
Yes.
How do you make the case for a larger marketing budget, or is it necessary to make that case?
Well, we're in a fortunate position right now that it's not necessary to make the case for increased spending to get the increased spending because we're at such a relatively low level. And the CEO has made a relatively public statement that we're going to reinvest a significant portion of our gross margin increases into advertising and promotion, as well as what we call brand building SG&A.
And so as he makes those pronouncements, what's been the impact on stock price?
Well, it went up significantly for the first 2 years as we made progress, and we've had a slide in this last year, not because of our investment or market shares or things like that, but because of the overall industry or the overall stock market, as well as, unfortunately for us right now, about 20-25% of our business is in areas that are not that attractive to investors. Our tools business is heavily tied, and decor business like Levolor is heavily tied to new housing starts. And Rubbermaid and a number of other products are heavily tied to resin and resin costs. So with oil prices increasing and housing starts going down, that's had a negative impact on our stock price that I don't think is a correlation to the brand building activity. So the good news is our CEO and the board is still very supportive of the mission, and we're plugging on with increasing our investment behind building brands.
You're currently on a mission to change the company and make it more and more customer driven. Mm-hmm. What are 1, 2, 3 of the major steps that you're working on?
Well, I guess the best way is to go back to this blueprint. The first thing is just making sure everyone throughout working on a brand really understands what that brand is supposed to stand for, its brand position, and who their key consumers are. We call them a bullseye target, the critical consumer that we want to make a connection with. That is a starting point. And then behind that, through every budget season, through the analysis we do, and through the planning season, we try to tie back the activity that's planned for the coming year to see is it building that desired brand equity that we want to build and targeting those consumers. Those, I guess it's 2 if you clump them that way. Those are big changes. It gets back to fewer, bigger, better initiatives and more focus of our activity to really build our brand the way we think it needs to be built.
Ted, what haven't I asked you that would help us better understand the challenges that you've got and the progress that you're making?
I don't know if it's haven't asked as much as maybe something I'd like to emphasize is, and especially if you contrast it to my experience I had at Procter & Gamble. Our company does not have a robust suite of tools for market measurement and for marketing return on investment. And in many cases, all we have is point of sale data for our own brands because of the retail channels we're in. But that does not mean that you can't put a bunch of smart people in a room and take some fundamentals out and talk about what are we getting for our money, where could we get more, how can we sharpen things. So we're continually trying to optimize, even with right now a bit of a handicap in terms of a true sophisticated model and dashboard. It can be done.
Right. What I love about looking at the Newell Rubbermaid case is that you're not in that unusual of a situation. Most companies don't have the wealth of data that P&G typically does. Mm-hmm. Data in the traditional sense of marketing research, but you have lots of experience in trying to capture that in some systematic way and learn from that, share it, is clearly part of what it is that you're doing.
Right.
So congratulations on taking us that far.
Thank you.
That's all the time that we have for Measured Thoughts today. I'd like to thank Ted for joining us, and thank you for joining us here at Measured Thoughts.